Maybe it would have been over.
Oh, nice roll! Oh! Not enough, not enough, not enough, not enough.
Now what, now what?
If you watch competitive fighting games, you've probably witnessed a hard read. A hard read being a moment where one player knew without a shadow of a doubt what their opponent was going to do and calculated the perfect play against it. How do your favourite players do this? How can we improve our mental game from managing our mental stack to downloading our opponents? That's what this video aims to cover. I'm going to talk about the psychology of Street Fighter 6, both inside the game and out, and teach you advanced concepts you can apply to your game starting now. Before we get started though, I'd just like to let you guys know that I now have a Discord server. It'll be mainly a place to hang out, play games and chill, and I plan on running some community events and polls if the reception is there. I'll have the link in the description for those of you interested, and without further ado, let's talk about what Sun Tzu really meant when he said know thy enemy. What do we gain from knowing our enemy? Understanding what your opponent likes to do lets us do two things: shut them down and force them to play your game. You've probably experienced rounds where you feel truly helpless. You feel you can't jump, can't press a button, can't drive rush or anything. You feel trapped, and that discomfort in that situation is exactly the result of knowing your enemy and shutting them down. Against each opponent you play, learn their habits and what they're trying to do. Identify their win condition through noticing where they like to jump, where they like to fireball, or where they may be fished with a spacing trap. The better picture you can paint of their game plan, the better prepared you can be to shut them down and make them play your game. Shutting down these approaches, however, is not as easy as saying just react, and this is where managing your mental stack comes in. I'll dive into the mental stack in a later chapter, but moving on, what happens once we can react and put a stop to our opponent's win conditions? Once you understand your opponent's game plan and can shut them down, you'll have them feeling uncomfortable, helpless, and we exploit these emotions against their will by making them now play our game. Playing your game is advice you've probably heard before, and what it boils down to is preventing your opponent from engaging in their own win conditions and forcing them to engage with yours. For example, if you're all about neutral, having sharp reactions and stopping your opponent's approaches will force them to play a grounded footsies game, where you can easily outclass them. A lot of players have bad habits that can be punished if you see them coming, and these bad habits come out in abundance the more uncomfortable they feel. You can see where I'm going with this now. Your mission should be to first understand your opponent's win condition, then shut it down using what we'll learn later about the mental stack, and finally continue forcing them to play your game. The more they play your game, the more uncomfortable they become. The more uncomfortable they become, the more you can smother them, whether it be punishing their last-ditch efforts to win, or simply overwhelming them by abusing their feeling of helplessness. To do this, you need a solid understanding of your own win condition and your opponent's, as well as the skill to prevent them from engaging with their own win condition. Go into games and practice. Learn what different characters generally like to do, what your opponent's specific game plan could be, and learn to be able to identify these things on the fly. Though it's important to note, this doesn't come instantly, and it may take up a bit of your round trying to decipher these things on the fly, so you need to understand risk-reward to ensure you're not throwing your games before you can actually learn something. Risk-reward is the art of weighing the odds of any interaction and making an informed decision based on your evaluation. Too many risks might win you the round, but it'll lose you the set, so you need to understand how to evaluate risks accurately. In the previous chapter, we spoke about knowing your enemy, and you can use this here. If you notice your opponent can't anti-air, suddenly jumping isn't as big a risk, and this is how your risk-reward evaluation changes based on your opponent. However, you can't evaluate risks if you can't recognize them. You might not realize it, but that poke you whiffed in neutral could have cost you the game, so whenever you get hit, you need to ask yourself what risk you are taking in that moment, and you'll slowly build a better understanding of what constitutes a risk in this game. Recognize risks, then evaluate, learn that everything from where you stand to where you use your meter is a risk. Granted, there are varying degrees of riskiness, but being able to recognize how every element in a round can affect you is the first step to effectively evaluating risk-reward. With such volatile gameplay and even more volatile characters, taking throws and mashing reversals are the biggest risk you have to consider every game. Knowing your enemy is never more important than when deciding when to take the throw. Treat every opponent as a blank state and start from scratch as you piece together where they like to tech and where they like to shimmy. Maybe it's on every wake up, maybe it's after exactly 4 throws. Constantly forcing your opponent into guesses and not panicking when your opponent is pressuring you is how you can paint the bigger picture on when they tech and when they shimmy respectively. This same logic applies to reversals too. When will your opponent DP and when do you need a break from pressure? The best way to improve this skill is simply play the game and analyze each opponent you play and their habits. Also, learn to play safe while you figure out your opponent. After all, you can't learn when they like to shimmy if you die to a whiffed reversal 15 seconds in. The better you get, the better your evaluation gets. But we can't talk about making correct evaluations if we don't talk about what to evaluate. The mental stack is how much focus we can devote to different strategies within a match. From everything we're doing to everything our opponent's doing, the lower on the stack it is, the harder it becomes to focus on, for example, anti-airing a jump. The mental stack is why you'll see high level players get jumped in on. They can anti-air, but the neutral game demands so much mental stack that jump moves down their list of priorities and thus becomes harder to react to. Your mental stack should always prioritize the most dangerous outcomes and filter down to the weaker options your opponent has. For example, whenever I play against Geef, jump becomes the highest priority in my stack, since I know it's what Geef wants to do to get in. But against Guile, I worry more about the footsies, since Guile benefits more from holding screen space. It's also important to mention that this is where knowing your enemy is so important. Understanding what they want to do, then internalizing that and using it to prioritize what we look out for is how we can shut them down and, as we spoke about before, make them play your game. We spoke a lot about knowing your enemy and how perfecting the art of the mental stack involves taking what you've learned about them and using it to manage your stack. And while we can manage our mental stack based on our opponent's habits, they can very well abuse this by not representing dangerous options till we forget about them. It's why you'll watch EVO and see Big Bird fail to anti-air Punk for the game and ultimately the EVO title. Punk demonstrated so many other threats that Big Bird was overwhelmed and was forced to move jump down his mental stack, and it's at this point Punk knew he could land a jump in and use that momentum to take the game. Obviously, you're not Punk or Big Bird, and this level of mastery takes a while to acquire. However, we can take these concepts of abusing our opponent's mental stack and use it ourselves to help us hold our defense in neutral. I want you to be aware of the mental stack, be aware of how to use it, how your opponent might abuse it, and how you can always ensure it's optimized to your opponent's playstyle. Know your enemy, use that knowledge to perfect your mental stack, and use that mental stack to evaluate risk-reward on both offense and defense. These concepts are only a brief introduction to the mental battles that take place in the heat of every match. Though taken to heart, these ideas will carry you far in your journey. Salt is FGC jargon that simply refers to the anger inside of you when you lose, the heat you feel when you get taunted, or the stubbornness to keep using a move in hopes it finally hits your opponent. Salt is a good thing. It's what drives us to get better and adapt to our opponents. But like all good things, salt must be had in moderation. Salt should make you want to get better. Salt should make you think, how can I beat this next time? Instead of, you should kill yourself. When you play Street Fighter 6, you need to control your emotions. Angry players play risky, which albeit works sometimes, but more often than not hinders your performance, and so leaving your emotions unchecked to run rampant in your gameplay more often than not will cost you rounds, games, and sets. Shifting your mindset is how you avoid salt, and I cannot stress this enough. I can safely say the reason most of you watching this get salty is because you lose to quote-unquote bad players, or players who are just flowcharting. This is where we shift our mindset and instead see it as, they did all they needed to do to beat you, and it's now your move to figure out how to get them back. If you only ever get salty against bad players, just assume everyone who beats you was good, and you'll never get salty. Now, it's not that easy, and this is only the first step you can take, but not taking your salt out by insulting your opponent's skill level is the biggest, and this is written in bold in my script, biggest way to stop getting tilted. If you can learn to use salt as a driver for adaptation instead of an excuse for losing, you will immediately see the results. Shift your mindset when you get salty, and you learn to stop getting mad at your opponents, which combined with this next chapter on how to not get mad at yourself, will make your mental game solid and your emotions controlled. Have you ever said the words, "I'm talking to myself"? If you have you ever given thought to who is the I and who is the myself? We don't really think about it, but a lot of people, players or not, will often talk to themselves, tell themselves to do X or to be more cautious of Y. And so as a competitor, it's important you understand that the I is self 1 and the myself is self 2. When we play, self 1 and self 2 both split the duties of the game amongst themselves. The self 1 is the analyst. He sits on the sidelines, points out your opponent's habits, makes strategic decisions on meter usage, and as you're all probably familiar with, points out our mistakes. The self 2 is the player. He's the star of the show. He doesn't speak much and only really listens to self 1, but if you've ever hit a clutch anti-air where you feel your hands moved before your mind, that was thanks to self 2. When we play and when we get salty, we like to blame self 2. We like to say, how didn't I anti-air that? Or, why am I playing so bad? And you might not realize it, but self 2 is the one taking all the flack here, and self 2 doesn't like it. He takes self 1's words at face value, he lets it get to him, and then he gets sloppy, doesn't play with his heart, and ultimately his gameplay suffers. But the thing is, self 2 knows damn well how to anti-air. He knows damn well how to play the game, and your words of beratement only hinder him. Imagine if you dropped a punish, only for someone watching you to say, hey, you missed that punish by the way. How would you feel? That's exactly how Self 2 feels. I know all of this sounds a bit wishy-washy, but your mindset in approaching the game really affects how you play, and making steps towards treating your Self 2 better is how you can level up your self-confidence and self-trust. Try this next time you play. Don't be subjective. Don't berate Self 2 for dropping a combo, but also don't feel like you need to praise him for a sick punish. You are the analyst, so analyze. Be objective. That was a missed anti-air, instead of, do I seriously not know how to anti-air? Or, that was a whiffed button, instead of, why would I even press a button there? This objectivity helps your mental state, lets you pick out your mistakes, encourages change, betterment, and confidence, as opposed to making yourself only feel worse and then in turn play worse. All of this aside, it's inevitable you get salty, but ultimately, bettering your mental state is a long journey and it won't happen overnight. Try take all the concepts covered in this section and apply them. I guarantee you'll see the difference. And if you'd like to learn more about the concept of the Self 1 and the Self 2, I recommend reading The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Gallwey. That's all I have for you guys today. Sorry this video took so long to come out, but I'm at university again, and my studies and part-time job unfortunately take up much more of my time. I'll still be working on videos though, and my next one will be something interesting, so you'll have to wait and see. And again, if you're down to hang out, play some games, or just chat, feel free to join my Discord server, and I'll always be around to answer any questions you guys have, as well as pester you guys in return on how I can improve my content. Thanks for watching, and thanks for the overwhelmingly positive feedback. It means a lot, and I always say it, but it's why I make these videos. With that, I'm done, so I'll see you guys later. Peace.